My name is Madison Thompson, and I am 28 years old. 4 weeks ago, my parents sold my great aunt's rare, first edition book collection, the one she promised would be mine, and used all $185,000 to buy my sister a destination wedding in St. Barth's. They thought Katherine was too sick in hospice to ever find out. They thought I was too weak to tell her. They were wrong. When I finally told Katherine what they had done, she did not cry. She simply reached for her phone, dialed one number, and said 7 words that would destroy everything my parents thought they owned. Drop a comment and let me know where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. I would love to know who is part of our community. The Garden District mansion usually smelled of old vellum and humid history, but today, it just smelled of a void. I stood in the center of the private library, my boots echoing against the floorboards Katherine had polished for 50 years. The shelves were skeletons. Every first edition, every hand-bound journal gone. My mother, Michelle, walked in, trailing the scent of expensive perfume and zero remorse. "Oh, Madison, do not stand there like a statue," she said, checking her reflection in the glass cases. "Your father handled the sale. It is for the best. Alexis needs that wedding to secure the Harrison connection. St. Barth's is not cheap." I did not cry. In my world of archives, emotions are noise, only facts have volume. That collection was valued at $185,000. Mom, Katherine promised it to me. Promises are for people who can afford them. My father, Matthew, added as he entered, glass of scotch in hand. "You are just the archivist, Madison. You are unpaid help. Alexis is the brand. Consider this your contribution to the family." I stared at them, and for the first time, the invisible chains of the survivor began to snap. For years, I had been the family's silent investor. I was the one who managed the estate's property taxes, the one who navigated the historic preservation laws, and the one who sat in the humid basement cataloging their legacy while they rented a lifestyle they had not earned. I had been trapped in a prison without bars, convinced that my only value was being the unseen engine that kept their high society facade from crashing. My compassion had been a luxury they had overdrafted for 28 years. But archives have memory. I did not argue further. I turned and walked to my small apartment over the carriage house, an apartment my parents also believed they controlled. Inside, my laptop glowed with a different kind of sunrise. I did not open a photo album. I opened a spreadsheet. I retrieved the digital inventory, the original appraisals, and the time-stamped photos of every volume. This was not a breakdown. It was an audit. By 12:03 a.m., the paper trail was complete. My parents were celebrating a wedding built on theft. They did not realize that in my world, if you do not have the original deed, you are just a squatter with a good tailor. The pre-wedding gala was a masterclass in the performance of wealth. The air in the courtyard was thick with the scent of jasmine and the low hum of people who mistook expensive cocktails for meaningful conversation. My parents were in their element, floating through the crowd like they owned the history of New Orleans itself. Alexis was the centerpiece, draped in silk that cost more than my annual research budget, her laughter ringing out like a brand siren. I stayed near the perimeter, a shadow in a navy dress, my camera bag, a silent witness at my side. I was not there to celebrate. I was there to observe the inventory. My mother, Michelle, found me near the fountain, her eyes already scanning for an audience. "Madison, for heaven's sake, try to look less like a funeral director," she hissed, loud enough for a group of Alexis's socialite friends to turn their heads. "You have been sulking since you arrived. It is one thing to be a bitter archivist, but it is another to try and sabotage your sister's happiness over a few dusty old books." The group let out a collective, performative titter. Michelle did not stop there. She leaned in, her smile sharp enough to draw blood. "I saw your little post about legacy. Do not be dramatic. Some people are born to be the story, and others are just meant to catalog it. Accept your role." Anger was not loud this time. It was clinical. I did not defend the library or the $185,000 they had effectively laundered into floral arrangements. I just rubbed my eyes, trying to summon the old urge to apologize. But there was only clarity. This was not a family dynamic anymore. It was a hostile takeover. Later, near the heavy oak doors of the foyer, my father, Matthew, cornered me. He did not offer a drink. He offered a threat. "I know you have been visiting Katherine every day," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous frequency. "She is fragile, Madison. If you start whispering nonsense about the collection, if you cause her any stress that complicates her final days, that will be on you." He stepped closer, the smell of expensive scotch heavy on his breath. "And remember, your apartment is part of the estate. Katherine might have signed the lease, but I am the one who manages her affairs. If you disturb the peace of this family, you will find yourself cataloging your own belongings on the sidewalk." I looked at him, and for a fleeting second, I saw the illusion of power he clung to. He thought he was the architect of my life, but he was just a squatter in a house built on my silence. "I hear you, Dad," I said, my voice steady and cold. "I hear every single word." The hospice room was a stark contrast to the gala's artificial glitter. It smelled of lavender, old books, and the quiet dignity of a life being summarized. Great Aunt Katherine was propped against her pillows, her eyes still sharp enough to cut through the anesthetic haze of her medication. I sat by her bed and did not filter the truth. I told her about the skeletons in the library, the $185,000 sale, and the 3-day destination wedding that was currently being built on the bones of her collection. I expected devastation, but Katherine only let out a long, measured sigh. It was the silent regret of the sentinel. For years, she had played the role of the silent observer, watching my parents become the predators she always feared they were. She told me that her heart failure was progressing faster than the doctors admitted, and that she only had maybe 6 months left, probably less. She had spent that time getting her affairs in order, hoping my father would prove her wrong. Her eyes filled with a rare, liquid sorrow as she looked at me. She confessed that her greatest mistake was not trusting my father, but waiting until her own death was the deadline to finally protect me. She had been caught between the hope that her son would find his conscience and the cold reality that his conscience had been liquidated for social status long ago. She told me she was sorry for allowing me to be the family's unpaid staff for so long while she waited for a change that never came. But the time for sentinel duty was over. Katherine reached for her phone with a hand that was thin as parchment, but steady as a surgeon's. She scrolled to a name she had not called in months and put it on speaker. 3 rings later, a deep, professional voice answered. "Harold," she said, her voice reclaiming every ounce of the authority that had built the Thompson estate. "Madison is here. The library is empty. It is time for them to meet my attorney." The call ended. Katherine squeezed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Harold Jennings has been my legal shadow for 30 years, she whispered. "My son thinks he understands the ledger of this family, but he has always assumed that possession is the same as ownership. That has always been his greatest weakness." By the time I left the hospice, the professional escalation had begun. This was no longer a conversation about hurt feelings or stolen books. It was a strategic movement of assets. Harold was already drafting the documents that would turn my parents' world of borrowed prestige into a liability they could not afford to pay. As I walked to my car, I did not feel like a victim. I felt like the sole beneficiary of a justice that had been 5 years in the making. Harold Jennings' office felt like a sanctuary of objective truth. It was a room where the chaos of family drama was distilled into the cold, hard numbers of a balance sheet. I sat across from him, my hands steady, watching as he opened a thick, leather-bound folder that he called the blood ledger. It was not an official bank document. It was a private accounting file Harold had unearthed from the estate's secondary digital archive, a record my parents never thought to delete because they assumed no one would ever look. "Madison, your grandmother established a trust for you when you were 13 years old," Harold began, his voice devoid of emotion, purely clinical. "It was intended to fund your doctorate, your research, and your eventual independence. But as I audited the withdrawal history, I found a series of systematic leaks. He slid a spreadsheet across the mahogany desk. I did not need to be an accountant to see the pattern. Starting 15 years ago, exactly $40,000 had been withdrawn from the trust every single year. The total was staggering. $600,000. Look at the authorization signatures, Harold directed. I leaned in. The loops of the letters were a perfect imitation of Great Aunt Catherine's handwriting, but the pressure of the pen was wrong. It was too aggressive, too desperate. They forged her signature, Madison. For 15 years, your parents have been embezzling your future to pay for Alexis's influencer lifestyle and their own social standing. I stared at the numbers until they blurred into a single, sharp point of clarity. This was not just a family disagreement or a misunderstanding. This was a criminal misappropriation of trust assets. I thought back to every time I had eaten ramen in my studio apartment, every time I had declined a research trip because I could not afford the flight, and every time my father had lectured me about my poor financial choices. It had all been a lie. My life of scarcity was not a result of my career path. It was an artificial construct created by my parents' greed. They had been living off my inheritance, treating my trust fund like an interest-free loan they never intended to pay back. The library sale was just the finale, Harold said, his eyes narrowing behind his gold-rimmed glasses. By selling that collection for $185,000, they crossed from simple embezzlement into federal misappropriation. They have left a paper trail that even a novice auditor could follow. I felt a surge of cold, methodical power. My parents thought I was a worthless burden, but the ledger proved I was the most profitable asset they ever had. They were not just status-obsessed socialites. They were criminals masquerading as parents. What is the next move? I asked, my voice as sharp as a scalpel. We do not just file a claim, Harold replied, a hint of respect in his tone. We prepare the finisher. We have the deed to the mansion, the evidence of the book theft, and now the blood ledger. We have everything we need to ensure that when they fall, there is no foundation left for them to stand on. Michelle's 60th birthday party was designed to be the apex of her social career. The Garden District mansion was glowing with 300 candles, reflecting off silver platters and the heavy, humidity-stained mirrors of the foyer. Every prominent name in New Orleans was there, including Alexis's future in-laws, the Harrisons. My mother stood in the center of the drawing room, draped in silk and acceptance, giving a speech about family legacy and the unbroken chain of tradition. My father, Matthew, stood beside her, beaming with the unearned pride of a man who believed his borrowed throne was permanent. I stood at the back of the room, invisible as always, until the heavy front doors swung open. Harold Jennings did not just walk in. He arrived with the weight of a final verdict. He did not offer a birthday wish. He walked straight to the center of the drawing room, his leather briefcase clicking open with a sound like a gunshot in the silent room. I apologize for the interruption, Harold said, his voice carrying with the authority of 30 years of law. But I am here as the legal representative of Katherine Whitmore. Given that this celebration is taking place on her property, she felt it was necessary to clarify the terms of your residency. My mother's glass of champagne trembled. Harold, this is my birthday. Whatever business you have can wait until tomorrow. It cannot, Harold replied, pulling a document from his folder. This is the deed to the property at 1412 Gardenia Street. Notice the name on the deed. It is, and has always been, Katherine Whitmore. My parents have been living here rent-free for 10 years, but ownership was never transferred. Not legally, not ever. A collective gasp rippled through the socialites. I watched the color drain from my father's face, leaving him looking 20 years older in 5 seconds. Harold was not finished. He pulled out the blood ledger. Furthermore, per the terms of a separate trust established 15 years ago, the following assets are irrevocably assigned to a single beneficiary, this estate. All financial accounts, and the rare book collection that was recently sold without authorization. The sole trustee and owner of these assets is Madison Rose Thompson. The silence that followed was suffocating. I felt the illusion of power of an empty wallet collapse in real time. My parents' entire high society identity had been a mask rented with money and property that did not belong to them. For decades, they had confused having wealth with being important. Now that the assets were removed, they did not just lose money, they lost their existence. Mr. Harrison took a sharp step back from my father, his expression shifting from friendship to cold calculation. He saw Matthew not as a partner, but as a liability. Michelle was no longer a queen. She was a squatter in a borrowed dress. Matthew grabbed the edge of the dining table, his knuckles white. "This is a mistake. Madison, tell them. You manipulated her." I stepped forward into the light, my voice clinical and devoid of the complicit silence that had defined my life. "The only manipulation, Dad, is the $40,000 you took from my trust every year for 15 years. The $600,000 you embezzled to fund this brand. Facts are not jealous. They are just final." My mother began to weep, but it was not the refined, delicate cry of a socialite. It was the desperate, jagged sound of someone realizing the kingdom she built on lies had just been audited out of her hands. The guests fled the mansion like rats from a sinking ship, their hushed whispers echoing in the grand hallway as they scrambled for their coats. In 20 minutes, the house that had been the epicenter of New Orleans high society for a decade was silent, leaving only the smell of extinguished candles and the stale scent of unearned success. My mother collapsed onto the velvet sofa, her $60,000 designer dress looking like a shroud against the antique fabric. My father stood by the heavy marble fireplace, his shoulders slumped, the fire in his eyes extinguished by the undeniable weight of the documents Harold had laid bare. "Madison, please," my mother whispered, her voice cracking with a desperation I had never heard, a raw, jagged sound that no socialite training could mask. "We made mistakes. We were just trying to maintain the family image for all of us. You cannot just throw your parents onto the street like common strangers." I looked at her, then at my father, and I realized my compassion had been a luxury they had overdrafted for 28 years. "I am not throwing you on the street," I said, my voice clinical and level, devoid of the anger they expected. "I am simply restructuring our relationship based on the terms you established. You taught me that family is a subscription service, and you have defaulted on the payments for 15 years. I am simply canceling the contract." Harold stepped forward with the cold precision of a forensic accountant, placing a single sheet of paper on the mahogany dining table. "This is a lease agreement for a 2-bedroom apartment in a modest complex in Mid-City," I continued, my gaze never wavering. "It is clean, it is safe, but there are no chandeliers, no humidity-stained mirrors to reflect a fake legacy. It is exactly what one can afford when they are no longer stealing $40,000 a year from their daughter's trust." My father's face went a deep, mottled red, then pale as bone. "Mid-City? Madison. That is where the help lives. It is beneath us. It is where I have lived for 10 years, while you spent my future on Alexis's social media engagement and St. Barth's sunsets," I replied. "I have already paid the first 3 months of your rent and the security deposit. That is my mercy. That is the only inheritance you have left." I picked up the blood ledger, the thick, incriminating file detailing every forged signature and every stolen cent, and handed it to my father. "This is your final statement. $600,000 total. I am not pursuing criminal charges for the embezzlement or the library theft tonight because Katherine asked me to show the patience she taught me. But consider this ledger a loaded weapon." My father gripped the file, his hands shaking so violently the paper rattled. I stepped closer, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "If you ever contact me again, if you try to guilt Alexis, or if you even set foot on this property without an invitation, Harold takes this ledger straight to the district attorney. Facts are not emotional, Dad. They are just permanent." My mother reached out for my hand, a final attempt at manipulation, but I stepped back into the shadows of the foyer. I spent my life being the unseen engine keeping your facade running. But the engine has stopped. Get your things. I turned to Harold. Ensure they are out by noon tomorrow. I have already hired a specialized archival restoration team to begin refilling those empty shelves at one. As I walked out of the drawing room, I did not look back. I could feel the silence of the mansion settling around me like a heavy blanket, but it no longer felt like a void. It felt like a clean slate. I walked toward the carriage house, my boots echoing with the cold finality of a woman who had finally audited her own life and found herself wealthy in everything that actually mattered. It is spring now in the Garden District, and the scent of jasmine no longer feels like a mask designed to hide the rot of a borrowed life. I spent the last 6 months refilling the library shelves. But I did not just buy back books. The $185,000 recovered from the wedding fund, combined with the settlement from my embezzled trust, became the foundation for something permanent. I established the Katherine Whitmore Educational Library, a free archive and research center for underprivileged scholars across New Orleans. Alexis called me last week from a noisy bus stop. She is working entry-level at a local firm, learning for the first time that a brand is worthless if you cannot pay your own streetcar fare. My parents remain in their mid-city apartment, living on the thin edge of a reality they spent decades avoiding. This is the justice of the seed sower. I realized that punitive justice, the kind that only focuses on the punishment of the past, is empty. True justice is the act of building a future that the predators are no longer allowed to inherit. I did not just get even. I changed the narrative of the Thompson name from one of theft to one of contribution. Tonight, the mansion is full of the quiet hum of students and the smell of old vellum. I sit in the center of the library, no longer a ghost or unpaid help, but the architect of a legacy that belongs to everyone. I am finally free. If this story reminded you of your own worth, hit like and subscribe. Check the description for more videos about the courage to set boundaries and build a life on your own terms.